Your Kenyan American family friend or child or relative is never coming back home, ever. I know that's a bold statement to make, but let's find out why in a few minutes. The truth is, many Kenyans who move abroad harbor the dream of coming back home someday, even if it means just coming to visit and going back. But a lot of us move abroad and hope to at least return in some kind of fashion. Unfortunately, not everybody makes it back, regardless of original intentions. In fact, unfortunately, some of us come back in the form of a cargo. So this morning, I want to tell you about the reasons some Americans or some Kenyans living in America or other parts of diaspora are never going to come back home, even if they desire to reconnect with the motherland. Good morning, friends. As you can see, today is a cleaning day. We are sweeping leaves all over the compound because we are expecting guests this afternoon. So as usual, I'm joined by my supervisor and some of the young men that typically help me around the home. And of course, we are filming from Karateng, which is an amazing village in Kisumu. And this is in the western part of Kenya. We are literally about just 25 minutes from Kisumu CBD. So if you're joining us for the first time, I hope you will watch till the end, and hopefully you will come back as a subscriber or as a regular viewer. And by the way, you will notice that the folks that typically help us, I've never really understood this. Many of the times, they don't care for work clothes and safety gear that people use while cleaning. I can tell you I've bought quite a few coveralls, boots, and all that for people that help us. But for whatever reason, in many cases, they prefer just using clothes other than the work clothes that we buy to just keep folks safe. I've never understood that phenomena, but yeah, I leave it up to them. These are adults, they do what works for them. So anyway, back to the issue of people never returning home. Before we really unpack this topic, I want to just give you a few caveats so that folks don't go off in the comment section saying a few things here and there. So number one, going back to Kenya is not for everybody. I say that all the time in my videos. Some of us want to go home, others don't, and it is perfectly fine. So those who return are not necessarily better than those who choose to stay. So if you're one of those people who are choosing to stay in diaspora, please don't feel judged. Your choice is just as valid as mine. I want to come back home, you want to stay, and that's okay. In fact, there are a lot of people who stay are very happy, lead very fulfilling lives, and I really see no reason why they should uproot all of that and come back home. So if diaspora works for you, more power to you. So as I always say, do you, bro. Whatever works for you, do it. So my conversation is more about those who choose to come back home. So just because we talk about returning home all the time, it doesn't mean we feel terrible for people who don't. Either way, it's fine. So let's get started. There are about 9 groups of folks, maybe 9 or 10 group of folks that I don't think are ever going to go back home permanently. Number one, there's a group of middle-aged men or women whose lives really, I would say, lives in Kenya are not very stable. And they live in diaspora, yes, but when they come to Kenya, the life back at home is so far from stable because of many reasons. Number one, they have been in the US for a long time. They work very hard. Many of them have kids both in Kenya and in the US. Some of them mostly have kids in diaspora. And for the women, a lot of them that I know have co-wives or have what I would describe as single husbands back in Kenya. So there's some level of instability in their lives that, in their Kenyan lives. Now, a few of them, when they get home, they hardly find a place that is comfortable. It feels like they're floating from one spot to another. No place where they're fully welcomed. In fact, in many cases, they're often used as ATMs. So Kenya really is not fun for them at all. They are only valued as much as their money is concerned. When their money runs out, nobody cares about them. So this group of folks whose lives in Kenya are not stable really don't find comfort in Kenya at all and are less likely to come back. Now, that also means typically that their lives in the US is often way more stable than their life in Kenya. The second group that is not likely to come back are often folks who are retired and thriving. I have quite a few people in my life that I know, both men and women, who have retired very well. They do okay as far as post-retirement earning. They've paid out their mortgages. They have some side hustles. They're very involved in the community. Many of them have been in the US for a long time, sometimes up to 50 years. A lot of them have kids and grandkids all in the diaspora, and there are very few family members in Kenya. Typically, they don't actually have a home or own a home in Kenya. And so really Kenya is not offering them anything that is better than what they have in diaspora. So that group of folks is really not likely to come back home. Number three, folks who I call medically fragile. Some of us have very, very intense medical needs that can be best supported in diaspora. I know folks who have really, really critical medical issues that require lots of experts that are hard to find in Kenya. In fact, living in Kenya could literally cost them their lives. And so medically fragile folks are less likely to be in Kenya, or they are forced to go back and forth. Now, the fourth group that I'm going to describe using the term dust survivors, those who have been given proper dust. A lot of them came home. I've seen cases where folks traveled home and their parents were killed when they went home. There was like some family issues going on. They got home, the parents were killed. If I was in that spot, I would never want to go back to Kenya. I've also seen cases of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's actually my neighbor here in California. He lives in Irvine, right here. I remember when he first came to Kenya, maybe the second time, allegedly one of the family members raped his wife. And that's a horrific event. Some cases, folks sell off stuff and then ship, and then they steal everything. Like you can imagine, you've packed everything in America, you ship them. When you get home, they loot and steal everything. They leave you with nothing. Those folks often don't want to live in Kenya. There are a few cases where people deal with village chemistry in the form of witchcraft, or even night runners. And for those of you who don't know what night runners are, these are athletes who typically exercise later in the afternoon or evening, generally in their birthday suits. So things like that can also make life very uncomfortable in some villages. And so people who have survived horrific events in Kenya are less likely to come back. Number five, there are folks who come home and then they realize Kenya is just not what they think. I know some of us can present a romanticized view of what Kenya is, and that is my experience in Karating, in a very small corner of Karating. There are many people who live in very hostile, or at least come from very hostile parts of Kenya. Especially, there are a few places in northern Kenya that are fairly insecure, close to the Somali border. That is not the same thing as Karating, or places that have extremely hostile weather. And so when they come back home and they realize really their part of Kenya is really nothing close to what we talk about, they don't want to come back to Kenya. And so sometimes we move back, and one of the most painful things that I experienced, one, is realizing that people moved on. See, when I left, I stayed for 10 years. When I came back, I was hoping to just jump back and rejoin and catch up with people where we left. No, people move on. And then you realize you are a stranger in your home. So that can create a hostile environment. And of course, Kenya can be exceptionally boring if you haven't figured out how to keep yourself busy and fit within the system. Kenya can be really boring. It can be so much fun, but it can be really boring if you don't know what you're doing. Sometimes people live with very hostile neighbors that make life difficult. So the hostility and finding out that your version of Kenya is not the same as what we present can really discourage folks from returning. And then, of course, people with families, kids, and other relatives in the US. If everybody lives in the US, then there's less incentive to move back. I see that a lot. And then, of course, people who move to Kenya and then financial disaster strike. I've seen a few people who move hoping to start some kind of a hustle, whether it's YouTube or farming, and then just the math doesn't add up. Because one way or the other, you have to figure out how to pay your bills in Kenya. And so if whatever plan you have falls apart when you're in Kenya, obviously you gotta pack up and come back. That happens. And then the more common one that is known is immigration. And this is one of the things that really saddens me. Amazing, amazing. I know amazing people in my life who would love to be in Kenya. But of course, they're still caught up in all the paperwork problems that all of us deal with at some point. My heart really goes out to them, and I truly hope that everybody gets the opportunity to go back and feel safe in doing so. Now, besides that, then there's a group of folks who, whenever they leave Kenya, they feel very relieved. I can assure you, if you get to JKIA and you're flying out of Kenya and it feels good, then I don't think Kenya is yours. Because many of us, that is usually one of the biggest indicator that we are ready to come back home. Because every single time we get to JKIA, it's not always fun. In fact, the only time you'll enjoy leaving JKIA is the first time you're leaving from home to diaspora. That's for most of us. But there's a group of Kenyans that every time they get to JKIA, they're like, oh man, I can't wait to get back to my home in Massachusetts or whatever. Those folks are less likely to come back. Then, of course, number 10, you have people who are raised in the cities. And I'm only saying this comparatively. City folks are better able to adapt to diaspora life than those of us who are in village. So village heroes like us have a hard time adjusting to US, and we always long to go back to the village. City people may be in a different place because I think the similarities are more between Nairobi and Long Beach versus Karating and Long Beach. And then, of course, the last one is very wealthy Kenyans who are making a killing in the US. I've met Kenyans who are multi-millionaires. I'm talking about dollar millionaires. Most of their wealth they've made in the US, and it's very hard for them to just drop that and come back home. I hope this was useful enough, and I hope you are more understanding of us, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.